it is Miles Davis's 100th centennial today. At WKCR, actually, we are doing a 72-hour broadcast, which should be really fun to check out if you get this around the time of May 26th. Either way, I put together a show for WKCR, and I included 3 interviews that I had conducted over the years with people who had played with Miles or had worked with him extensively. And if you like only okay sound quality, today is your day. But man, it's an amazing lineup. I have an interview I did, I believe, in 2010 with Jack DeJohnette, who is on Miles' most classic electric album, Bitches Brew. Along with In a Silent Way, I would say most classic. But also, he's on Big Fun and Live Evil and parts of a tribute to Jack Johnson. So great, and just one of the greatest and singular drummers on the planet, Jack DeJohnette. If you're not familiar, his trio stuff with Keith Jarrett, it goes on and on. So we're going to listen to that interview with Jack DeJohnette. We're going to listen to an interview with John Scofield, the legendary guitarist who worked for many years side by side with Miles in the 80s. And then we'll listen to an interview I recorded sometime, I think, between 2005 and 2010 with George Wein, the legendary producer of Newport Jazz Festival, Newport Folk Festival, New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, and much, much more. And he tells the story of Miles' return in 1955. How he you'll hear George says his career was in shambles, and he played Newport and got signed to Columbia and had a rebirth in his career. One that lasted for another 3 decades. So let's start out with this conversation with Jack DeJohnette. It was over the phone from Chicago and recorded on an ancient system at the radio station. So forgive the sound quality, but the thoughts are deep. Then we'll hear John Scofield, and finally, George Wein.
Great.
All right. And then the Jackie McLean, that's what led you to the Miles Davis gig, correct?
Yeah. Well, Jackie had hired Tony Williams before Miles hired him. So, Miles came around to hear me with Jackie, and Jackie said to me, Miles and I have the same taste in drummers. And Miles you're going to be playing drums with Miles one day. So it came to pass.
Yeah, he was
actually filled in for Tony a couple of times when he wasn't available. So before I actually really officially stayed with the band on a permanent basis, I had played with Miles, with Ron and Herbie and Wayne.
Wow, so you were there right during that whole transformational period of Miles's band, which ended up changing all music, basically. So when you were doing this, were you thinking during your time with Miles, were you thinking you're trying to be a sideman and support his vision, or were you kind of feeling free to do whatever you felt you wanted to do? How'd you approach your role in that band?
No, he just left me free to do what I wanted to do. He didn't restrict me in any way. You know, that the bands at that time, he expected the musicians to think for themselves, and so he could set up a platform for him to do what he did. You know, so yeah, I had a lot of freedom working with him.
So that's totally was your vision, what was going on there, like on all those classic albums. So
well, my vision was just to play the best I could be and support and inspire the musicians to the best of my ability.
And did it feel at the time like you guys were making history, or did it just feel like normal life?
Well, you know, at the time you knew it was special. Anything to do with Miles was special. So, you know, you had that. You know, it was a very exhilarating feeling to be, you know, to be sort of at the mecca of jazz, one of the jazz greats. You know, playing with that band and being given a stamp of approval. That really raised your stature, you know.
Right, and it seemed like one of the things that you definitely did, which was probably different from all the other drummers, is there was you kind of brought in more of a funk and dance beats and rock stuff and a whole new range of rhythms for Miles to react to.
Yeah, well, but Miles was listening to that same stuff too, so that's where he wanted to go, you know. So, you know, I provided that backdrop for him.
Right. But the interesting thing about that stuff rhythmically is that while you're providing, it's definitely got that funk, you're also, there's a tension because you're also kind of like pulling it apart and throwing in all these other influences that had come through, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a very eclectic mix, but I was also able to, be able to play the groove and embellishing it without destroying the groove, you know.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to actually ask you about. Is with your playing, somehow the pulse is always there. I mean, I guess you're kind of like a rock, which the band can rely on, and yet you also can get like totally a free feeling at the same time. So I was wondering if there's something that you do practice-wise to get there, some kind of a lot of work with a metronome, or I don't know.
It's just a natural gift, man. You know, I'm a natural musician, so I just sort of go into this sort of a Zen space in a way, where I'm really totally tuned in to what's going on, to the internal and the external of creating sound, rhythm, and music, you know, with the players, you know. So it's I don't know how to describe it. I'm just saying okay. The best way to describe it is I've said it before, but I'm plugged into the creative library. Yeah, plug into the creative library of to the library of creative consciousness. Yeah. So there's always something new to come up there. So I'm not trying to repeat things. I'm just trying to come up with something new all the time.
And I guess plugging in would require to be like totally in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
All right, that's our conversation. You can hear the whole thing if you look through the NYC Radio Live for Jack DeJohnette. You can hear that whole conversation, as you can find the whole conversation with John Scofield. But here is John Scofield just talking about Miles, and this is from 2026.
Any musician plays with Elvin Jones, like, you're programmed to just think like Coltrane. You're like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody, all my friends, the drummers, they all tried to play like Elvin.
Yeah.
So it was just like the greatest, and then playing with Miles again. There was like all the trumpet players wanted to play like Miles, and here I was playing, getting a chance to be next to the real thing and all. And with Miles, that's really where I got to spend a lot of time with him for I think almost 3 years in the band, and we worked a lot. And yeah, so that before that, I guess I don't know.
I mean,
think
you wrote.
He didn't fire me.
Co-wrote songs. Yeah.
yeah. He he used the guys in the band to write music, and I ended up at that period doing a lot of stuff with him. We didn't compose together like Burt Bacharach and Hal David. He would just listen to. He would like suggest a groove, and I would play over it, improvise, and then he would take parts that he liked and use that as the melody. He did it to himself too. He would record himself playing, and then he liked this one little part. That would become one of the melodies that the band played. Everything was over vamps at that point. It was really electric groove, backbeat stuff. But you know what? I mean, talking about the Mount Rushmore as a jazz fan and everything, getting to hang with Miles and to hear about the music and his views on music and his the stuff that he liked and stories, about this guy and that guy and what he valued in music. This was really a blessing, to be around that.
Yeah, I mean, anything jumping out that he shared with you?
Oh, he'd tell us how to play sometimes, and he got me in a room once and he said, okay, he played piano and we played something. He goes, just play. And then he goes, you're slowing it down. Why are you doing that? And I said, well, Miles, I'm just trying to play relaxed, so it's cool, so it's not all frantic. And he goes, don't ever do that. Play right on the beat. And then I started to think about it. I realized how he could do that and how important that was, so you didn't drag the band down, even though you thought you were sounding all loose and nice over it, you could actually affect the other musicians because they would play with you and the tempo would drop. So that's one thing he told me. Another thing he told me was just play with space. And that's so important. And it unifies the music to have the band come together, and nobody wants to hear a soloist just blabbing on and on and on nonstop. It's supposed to be part of the band.
Did he speak about stylistic directions or anything like that?
He was pretty cool with me about that. A lot of times he would say what he didn't like, and then you just sort of knew. No. Yeah, he talked about the rhythm section, how that would work. He wanted it to really be like some funk, like Prince at the time or something, the rhythm section, the way it felt, But his insight into improvising, on your instrument, blowing, was really fantastic. He would. Remember one time he said he was listening back to a tape of us, and I was playing a solo, and he goes, "Uh-oh, listen to that. John's getting happy. Don't do that, John. Don't get happy up there." I think he meant I was being, a little verbose or whatever, and so yeah, it was great.
It's interesting what you say about his rhythm, because once I took the So What solo of Kind of Blue, and I don't know if you can do this, but on YouTube you can play things at any speed.
Yes.
So I put it on at like a quarter speed, and I was just listening. and it's still swinging at a quarter speed, and as he was saying, yeah, it's right on the beat. It's really
his time thing was really fantastic. The way he could, I mean, sometimes when we'd be playing with a band and it really wouldn't be coming together, and I'd solo and maybe some of the other guys would solo, it would be okay, and then Miles would play, he would solo, and his rhythmic thing would put you right in the, you know. And I'm not talking about like playing pushy. He wasn't. It was just so accurate and beautiful that way that the whole band kind of came together. Trumpet too can be really fantastic, pointed. Real beautiful rhythmic thing can happen on with trumpet on lines, eighth note lines.
And I watched the show. There's a show on YouTube with that band. I think it's somewhere in Germany, I want to say, with Daryl Jones and Al Foster, and yeah, you guys come out like really swinging, especially Daryl Jones, has such an intense. And then so it was really smoking. And then it's interesting because it's like Miles was getting interviewed. And he's getting the kind of typical questions that he probably always got. And he's answering in like it's almost like mysterious answer. But then when you think about it after a while, you're like, oh, that makes sense. And he seemed actually warmer than I always thought of him as quite a frightening, the Prince of Darkness kind of thing. But I guess you got to see all sides of him.
Yeah, he could be really warm and friendly. He had an incredible personality, and he could be really charming if he wanted to be. And he could also be really cutting, and he was really smart and really quick and funny as hell too.
Did he? And you're saying he shared some stories from back in the day. Like, did he?
Yeah. No, I can't remember. Well, yeah, you would talk about Bird and Coltrane, and and what it was like to be around Charlie Parker as a young man, and But everybody says, "Oh, what Miles stories do you have?" I've already given you all my Miles stories. I can't remember anything else.
I'll stop shaking this tree.
All right, well, I guess we got all of John Scofield's Miles stories, at least the ones he could tell publicly on a podcast. I suspect there are more. But yeah, let's finish it off with my old boss, George Wein, who I worked for a couple of years for. Legendary producer with his memories of Miles. And that too, it's a great episode. You can look that one up if you haven't heard it. Where was Miles Davis's career before?
Well, Miles Davis's career is in Ashes. I hadn't even put him on the festival. And this was 1955 in the second year of the festival, and it made all this news the first year. I was in a club in New York, and Miles wasn't working there. He was in the back of the club, big club, Basin Street East or something like that. And I'm walking out, and Miles says, "Hey, you gonna have a jazz festival again up in Newport?" I says, "Yeah, Miles." He says, "You can't have a jazz festival without me." I says, "You want to be in a festival?" I said, "You can't have it." Just kept repeating, "You can't have a jazz festival." So I said, "Okay, I'll call Jack. I'll set up." Jack Whittemore was his agent. So he didn't have a band. He wasn't advertised. So I had Monk and Jerry Mulligan, and they didn't have bands. I brought them up as singles. Mm-hmm. And I put together this group with Monk and Jerry Mulligan, and I got Connie Kay and Percy Heath to play with them because the Modern Jazz Quartet was there. And I forget whether Zoot Sims was there or there was somebody else there. You should know that. And Miles and Monk, they had, you know, they weren't on the same musical beam. But they played Monk around midnight, and we had a bad sound system that night. Wasn't very good. The only one that came through was Miles. He put the bell of his horn right in the microphone. It came through clear as a bell. The most beautiful thing you ever heard. Playing Monk's tunes. And Miles comes off the stage, and I'm right standing there. I said, "It's beautiful, Miles. Just tell Monk he plays the wrong changes around midnight." I said, "Miles, he wrote the song." And he told Monk, later on he told Monk that he played the wrong changes. But everybody ran up to see Miles. That's when George Wein signed him to Columbia, you know, and that was when he started his comeback, you know.
Wow.
He still had, you know, albums to do for whatever label it was, Prestige or whatever it was, you know.
And you had a long and varied relationship with Miles.
Well, we, you know, with a lot of musicians, you have to gain their trust because basically they don't trust you to start with, you know, because they'd all been, particularly in those days, they'd played clubs all over and then didn't do business, they didn't get paid, you know, and they'd go, I mean, they didn't trust people, particularly the black musicians. White musicians were just as bad. But I mean, they really had been, you really had to earn trust. And you never knew how to earn trust. I mean, you couldn't say, "I'm a nice guy." I mean, don't worry about it, I'll take care of that. It didn't mean anything. So with Miles, we were in, I'd set up a tour of Europe, which was very difficult for me because he was, I have a letter that I wrote to him. It's in my files. I think it was in my book. I put the letter in, you know, and so he went to Europe for me, but he wasn't happy. And he was supposed to play in Barcelona, and he went to Barcelona, and it was a double concert there, which wasn't uncommon in those days. And he'd signed a contract to do a double concert in Barcelona. And he gets there, he said, "I'm not going to do a double concert." I wasn't there, I was in Paris. And Charlie calls me from Paris, from Barcelona. He was road manager for Miles.
Charlie Bourgeois.
He's Miles won't play the 2 concerts. He wants more money. So Charlie puts Miles on the phone. I said, "Miles, I don't have any more money." I said, "I'm going home, tell Charlie to give me, buy tickets." I said, "Miles, I don't have a gun." I said, "You want your tickets?" I told Charlie to give me the tickets, and he went home. But meanwhile, this whole thing had occurred because I had paid Miles by check in Paris before he went to Barcelona. So he thought he was paid, right? He had a check. So I was flying home on a Saturday, and that was the night Miles was supposed to play in Barcelona. In those days, when you came in, if there was a balcony, you could look at the people who were coming in to pick up their baggage. You can't do that now. And I see that there's a plane from Barcelona. Joyce was with me coming in right after us. And who walks through there but Miles? I says, "Motherfucker." I mean, I could see he didn't play. He left those people in Barcelona hanging, which they eventually did a pretty good thing. Miles had his group stayed there. And so the people in Boston put the group on, so it wasn't a total, because that was a very great group. I forget, I think Herbie and them all in a group.
Oh, okay.
You know, so they put that group on and they played. So I go to the bank at 9 o'clock Monday morning to stop payment on the check. I paid him Thursday night in Paris. Miles calls me on Wednesday. He said, why did you stop the check? I says, why didn't you play the gig? He says, fuck you. Hangs up. Never had a problem with my eyes. It's total trust after that. You know what I mean? Because I wouldn't let him push me. You know, he knew that I was willing. The people in Barcelona never forgave me for years. They did eventually, because I'm a big hero in Barcelona now. But I was just there, spent 4 days there. You never saw such publicity. But for years, they said, well, they would have paid Miles for they didn't want to lose those. They would have. People will do that. They buckle under. That's why the musicians do that. Every so often. They don't do it now, but they used to do it a lot. Miles did it on the last concert he played. The very last concert, it was at Hollywood Bowl. And we had 2 concerts, one with, what's the name, at Jones Beach. I was partners with what's his name? The promoter in New York, you know, the old.
Oh, yeah.
At Jones Beach, he did. And the other was the Hollywood Bowl for the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Well, we had a festival at the Jones Beach, and so I call, I can't think of his name. And I said, Miles wants more money. He says, well, what do you think? I said, I don't want to pay him. I said, I'm consistent. I said, you got Winton on that show, you got Nina Simone, you got 4 artists on there. Just put up a sign and say, Miles Davis will not appear tonight. And anybody wants a refund before they go in, give them the refund. And nobody will want it. They all want to see everybody. Well, sure enough, that's exactly what happened. We didn't play Miles. But the people in the Hollywood Bowl, they said, we can't, he's it. He's the night. We can't do it. So I went up to his room. I said, Miles, they're willing to pay you. I gave him cash, whatever it was, $10,000, $20,000 difference, you know. Probably making $40,000 for the night. He wanted more because he knew it was an outdoor concert. He didn't realize so many people. That's his story, you know. So I gave him the money. He played the concert, and a few weeks later he went in the hospital and never came out. You know, that was his last concert. He was Miles right up until the end.
Yeah. And you had, he had given you some paintings of his.
Yeah, I have 2 paintings of his right here in the apartment, you know. Now, we were very close at the end, you know, and then he gave me a painting once, and I called him up and I said, Miles, you should see a painting. I had it framed. I paid $600 to have it framed. He calls me a few weeks later, a month later, I want my painting back. I said, what do you mean you want your painting? You gave it to me. He says, no, I want my painting. You can bring my painting. He just repeats himself when he says it. So I give it back. He's having an exhibition of his paintings. Paintings up there, $15,000. I go to him, I said, at least you could have paid me the $600 I paid for the framing. I said. So the next time I saw him was in Paris. And that was the year he died, you know, before, because he was doing that thing he was on tour for me, but he was doing a thing in Montreal where he played with Gil Evans and conducting, what's his name, was playing behind him, so that Miles couldn't, if he couldn't play the notes, what's his name, playing the guy that plays Miles all the time now. And so we had dinner in Paris. He brought me another painting to replace the one that he took back. We had very touching moments.